This is the second video in a series I'm making about funding, performance data and further education. In this video I'll be talking to a senior manager from a college in the West Midlands about some of the issues associated with funding and its impact on colleges. At the outset I want to reiterate that the purpose of my work is not to focus on individual colleges or teachers or senior leaders in FE. No, my purpose is to look at structures. In particular, to focus on how the funding arrangements for colleges can distort the curriculum. When I use the term curriculum here, I mean the whole learning experience of our young people attending college courses. Because since incorporation, we've had a funding regime in FE that has, for 20 years now, in some cases distorted teaching and learning and making life extremely difficult for colleges, mainly because of the annual nature of the funding cycle. In this video then, I'm interviewing Chris Davis. Chris, can you outline to us something of your background and your career in FE to date?
I've been in FE for nearly 30 years. Some of my other senior roles recently have been Director of Teaching and Learning and Director of Quality. I've also held a number of senior roles with regard to curriculum and teacher training. In my current role, I'm involved in all aspects of curriculum planning and curriculum delivery in terms of the actual modelling and how we look at individualised study programmes and how those alter and vary dependent on the nature of and level of the programme and the nature of the learners.
We're talking about funding. Obviously, colleges have to have funding to work. But can you outline for us how you've noticed that funding has kind of impacted on teaching and learning, for example?
Yeah, well, I would say definitely when the first impact of funding, I was a fairly junior manager really. I was more of a course coordinator in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, the thing that I really noticed was that certainly there was a change in terms of an emphasis on getting us all onto new contracts. Right. As it started to develop post-incorporation.
Right.
And there was a move towards more targeted lesson observations, usually on an annual basis, where I have to say, as I say, I was already into teacher training at that point, so I found they were very different to a teacher training type observation, so they weren't really focused on a developmental approach. They were more around getting a grade. So it became far more about performativity, about quantitative measures of performance, and a lot less about the process of education, the process of the learners as they progress during through a learning experience.
Okay, now that's interesting what you're saying there, because for some people, maybe for some of the people looking at the video, they would think, well, if we want to improve things, we need to measure them. So I guess that might be the percentage of the people passing your courses, for example. From the outside, it might look as if that's a really common sense way of doing things. Have you got any examples to show how it doesn't work like that?
Well, I mean, one quite recent one, which is quite interesting, is that all of a sudden employability skills have become very important.
Okay.
And I found that development quite interesting in terms of the notion that one of the things that as teachers you would want to be focusing on is how you're developing the skills to enable the person to be successful in whatever chosen career they might be moving into.
Yeah.
And in a number of areas that might not just be about specific skills, but more generic skills that would enable them to be successful in a wide range of careers. So for us, I would certainly say from my point of view, and most of the teachers I've ever dealt with, it's about providing a range of skills that would open up people's opportunities.
Right.
So it's not just about specific measurements and metrics. And so now that's become almost a requirement really for all full-time learners. There would be an expectation that they have some aspect of work experience. It's not just work experience though, it's the notion of how do you build employability skills into all aspects of the curriculum.
Yes.
Which I have to say, again, going back towards the start of my career, those sorts of employability skills were just the norm. They were the things you'd expect to be developed.
Absolutely.
And I think along the way we've lost some of those things as we were trying to follow the metrics of the performativity culture that developed to try to make sure we got the qualification completed.
Okay.
Sometimes that means you miss some of those broader things out.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying, in order to focus on, for example, assessments, which might be written assessments, the college has ended up maybe sort of shaving off some of the things like experience with employers.
Yeah, the only issue with some of the recent developments which are useful, particularly in terms of employability skills, is that the funding envelope is still extremely tight, and there's a lot of different elements now that need to be made up in terms of the individual study programme.
Right.
So although there's this requirement and expectation built in there, it's difficult in some cases for colleges to be able to meet all those expectations.
You mentioned study programs. How long have study programs been in operation now? Is it 2 or 3 years?
It's about 3 years now.
It's 3 years.
Yeah.
And
So it's based on the notion of a full-time learner.
Right.
So it's looking at the funding per learner.
Right.
And what we're looking at there in terms of initially the outline was around 540 guided learning hours.
Okay.
And then within that you will have a main vocational qualification usually, and then there will be a number of additional parts added on to that. No, so what's happened is that initial requirement for 540, we're still sort of funded around the 540 mark,
Okay.
but actually the requirement for delivery has gone up to 600. So there's an expectation you will deliver 600 hours. So that the funding hasn't increased, but the extra, there's another 60 hours of delivery effectively in terms of what we expected to do.
Right.
You know, the tension is there constantly about trying to save money, trying to get value added, while at the same time understanding that that's going to have an impact on the quality of what you do.
I mean, I had a conversation with a German colleague on a European Erasmus bid about literacy education, and when I explained that our funding, the funding for FE adult education at the time for literacy was dependent on them passing, she was horrified. She said, "Well, but doesn't that mean that people cheat and just teach them to the test?" I said, "Well, it's funny that you should have identified that within 5 seconds, because that's the way it's operated for the last 20 years. But the study programmes was sort of a move away from that, wasn't it?
Well, you could argue that, but I mean, I'll give you one of the other difficulties is that most learners would if they come to college, but now the way that the funding is that basically if they are not studying English and maths, then we will receive no funding for them. In other words, if they don't attend the qualification, they have to actually be attending and doing. So,
is there any money still attached to the passing or not?
There is some achievement funding. I don't know exactly what the percentages are for that, and they have changed almost yearly to the point you sort of lose track of them. But more the emphasis now really has been around or to me that more of the issue for the college is around the fact that there's such a lot to squeeze into those hours.
Right.
You know, and that's where the pressure comes on teachers. So you've got these competing things. You know, you've got the main qual, and you're going to have probably some subsidiary qualifications that would assist with that learner in terms of providing employability skills.
Yeah.
Then you've got work experience. Then you've got English and maths, and then you've got any other wraparound things, enrichment, tutorials and so forth. I would say your average 16 to 18-year-old does not come to college, generally speaking, as their primary learning goal to study English and maths. They come usually to study something which they consider is going to help them with whatever vocational route they want to go down, whatever their career aims are.